right, and I will hand it over to Michael to give us a brief overview of the paper.
Okay, so let me share my screen briefly. Am I able to share the screen? You are muted. Yeah, I can share my screen. Can I share my screen briefly?
Yeah.
All right, so here. Okay, so in this research, we ask, does the micro foundations of the democratic peace work among Ghanaian, Nigerian, and Indian public, or are publics in non-Western advanced democracies less likely to advocate for the use of force against democracies than autocracies? And finding that democracies do not go to war is probably one of the main or the most well-known in IR and political science. And among all scholars, public opinion is very important in explaining the causal mechanism behind the theory. But then scholars who have focused on this field of work have only used audiences from advanced Western democracies. It is only in recent times that we are seeing scholars use audiences outside of the US and Britain. So what do we seek to do? We wanted to extend the boundaries of the theory by focusing on some global South democracies, i.e. India, Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa along the way. South African samples are not in yet. Also, following after Bakke 2017 and 2020, we used territorial threats instead of the conventional nuclear threats, which we thought has a way of exaggerating the threat in the minds of respondents. So we tested for 6 hypotheses, largely focusing on the use of military intervention and whether it is morally wrong or not to use force, and also the imposition of economic sanctions. So this covered the 3 hypotheses. We used 2 samples from MTech samples from India, each of which consists of 500 respondents. In Ghana and Nigeria, we use student samples, 130 and 400 students respectively. Our DVs are measured on 11-point scales. And we ensure that even though our scenarios are hypothetical, they represent realistic scenarios in the minds of respondents. And also, our baseline scenario is when the adversary country is both autocracy and has no significant or any level of alliance with the country that the respondent comes from. So what do we find? First of all, we found that there is no evidence at all when it comes to the role of democracy in moderating the willingness to use force against other democracies among the Ghanaian sample. And so that is the main finding here as far as the Ghanaian population is concerned. But something we also find is that Ghanaians do not think that it is morally wrong to use force against democratic aggressors that they have other trade or alliances with. When it comes to Nigeria, and again, we do not find any support for the democratic peace on its own. Neither do we find that when it is combined with trade or alliances. But then what we find support for is rather hawkishness, such that respondents who score very high on the hawkishness scale are most likely to advocate for the use of force, and both force and economic sanctions against countries, regardless of the regime of the country. That finding kind of replicates across India also, where hawkishness is very, very high. The finding is very significant. But then when it comes to the conventional democracy, we do not find any support for that. In the Indian sample using territorial threats also. When it comes, we find similar results. So we ran two experiments for India, one with nuclear threats, the other with the usual territorial threats. And the reason is to have some variation on the threat. As I said earlier, nuclear has a way of exaggerating the role or the effect of the threats in the minds of respondents. So here, again, we don't find support for democracy on its own, but then when we combine it with trade, we find a little support for that, not very robust, that they are less willing to advocate for use of economic sanctions, but not force, not military intervention against non-democracies. So our main findings are that we don't generally find support for democratic peace among Indian, Ghanaian, or Nigerian participants. It doesn't, we simply do not find that effect at all. The results also do not show any effect of alliance, but do indicate the potential effects of trade on respondents' willingness to advocate for the use of force. Again, the results do not support the expectation that it is morally wrong to use force against opposing country. But the main finding, or the main determinant of the use of force, or the reason participants who want to advocate for use of force, is whether the participants have high dispositions for hawkishness or not. That seems to be a very common finding across all of our samples. So just, that is a brief summary of the project. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Michael. So I will pass it on to Emmanuel to give you some feedback on your paper.
All right, thanks, Justine. Thank you, Michael and Zlatan, for your paper. It was very interesting to read, and thank you all for being here as well. So I'll try. Hopefully, I don't think I'll take the full 10 minutes, but the way I configured my comments were to be more developmental. So sort of is thinking about this if I were reviewing this as a journal reviewer. And so some of the more technical aspects, I think we can leave for the broader discussion. I think, Femke, you might have some, because they cite you very heavily, you might have some perspective on some of the technical aspects there, and welcome as well. All right, so I think overall, I think your approach to the paper is great in the sense that, it's, does that classic sort of gap in the literature perspective, right? Like, looking at something as widespread as the democratic peace theory and applying it to a global South context, right? So I think that is a great novel contribution, and I also think your contribution of using public opinion, I think is an interesting framework, as you mentioned, is sort of as one of the micro foundations of democratic peace theory. But I do think that this offers a good way to think about again sort of the more sort of the potentially domestic implications of things like the democratic peace theory. And so my suggestions for the paper, or places I think you can improve it, will be mainly around questions of framing, engaging with the case, and theorizing. And the very first thing that I would say is that the paper could use a lot more of your voice, right? Off the bat is, the paper just starts by talking about democratic peace theory literature, but does not sort of give us any sort of narrative about why democratic peace theory is something to be problematized, right? Doesn't give us any sort of perspective about how you as the researchers are approaching democratic peace theory. Rather, and I think this is a theme throughout the whole paper, you're basically talking about what everyone else has done without any sort of concrete engagement with here's how we diverge from that, here's how we align with it. Now, there are some places where you do that a little bit better than others, but I think that's sort of the feel I had as I was reading the paper, in that the paper read more as a survey of what other people did and then an experiment on top of it, rather than your sort of voice and approach to problematizing and conceptualizing democratic peace theory. Yeah, so, it doesn't, in terms of theorizing, you don't really give us a glimpse of how you're theorizing, or how you're thinking about theorizing the democratic peace theory, and I think your contribution to the literature, how you diverge from the literature, can be more explicit. So specifically, you talk about public opinion as a way, as a part of, as you call the micro foundation, or one of the micro foundations of democratic peace theory. Yet, tell us why you're using public opinion, right? Why are you using experiments to talk about or to examine democratic peace versus another method, or versus just talking about why you're using territorial disputes rather than using the nuclear framework like you do. So you started to do this in the presentation a bit, but you could do it stronger in the paper. And then also, I think low-hanging fruit would be, why is it necessary to talk about democratic peace theory beyond Western democracies, right? What is the utility? What's the value of looking at specifically countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and India, who have really unique experiences and relationships to democratization and democracy in very vast, domestic contexts in which people understand democracy, right? So you have an interesting story to tell. And sometimes I think your engagement with the literature and sort of the engagement with the experiment you get hung up on that in the paper, rather than letting your voice or your perspective on these cases sort of shine through. So that's what I would say, sort of one of the general framing of the paper. Relatedly, I would like to see in the paper you engage more with how you're generating the hypothesis, and I think this goes alongside sort of the framing and theorizing, right? So the hypotheses sort of come out of nowhere, right? In the sense that you just sort of throw them out there and say, hey, we're going to look at these things, and even so, I think the connection to the prior section, the literature, could be, the hypothesis connection there could be a little bit clearer. But in terms of how you generate the hypothesis, I think you could do a lot more work to provide a narrative about, okay, we provide hypothesis one because we're thinking about public opinion in the relationship to democratic peace in this way, and sort of spell it out for the reader. For example, you talk about choosing Ghana, India, and Nigeria because they lack interventionist traditions of the US, UK, Russia, and China. But it's not really clear what that means, right? Or it's not really clear about why that is a part of your theorizing. So something like that would be an entry point of where you could elaborate and sort of spell out what that actually means for the implications of your hypothesis and your theory. And then to that end, again, I think, sort of allude to this, but consider changing up the structure of the literature review to center your contributions and foreshadow your hypotheses, rather than saying, a bunch of people said stuff about this, then we're going to test, and we're going to test this stuff, right? A simple way of saying, like, here's what the literature says, but here's how we diverge from it. Here's how we're theorizing about what the literature says. Here's what we contribute to this different discussion about democratic peace theory with these particular countries. And this is how we plan to examine it through the hypotheses. Again, another point on framing. Research design, you could use to, you can improve that section as well by talking, again, I think elaboration, would be the theme here, right? In that elaborating a little bit more on your samples. You do it better in the presentation than you did, I think, in the paper, but talk about maybe, what, particularly in the context, I think, of countries like Ghana and Nigeria, and it might be hard to do this in the experiment, but give some context as to why you think respondents would be oriented a certain way versus another, right? So for example, the fact that you surveyed students, right? Do you think that might have any implications for their perceptions on democratic peace or their perceptions on the use of force? And as I'll mention later, the unique experience of particularly Ghana and Nigeria with military interventions and military rule, how that might play on their perceptions of relations or alliances in democratic peace as well. And then lastly, on that point, I think, again, in terms of elaboration in your research design, you've got to be a little bit clearer about how you're conceptualizing things. So for me, it was unclear. I mean, I could infer what you mean by militarization and hawkishness, for example, but it's not clear for the reader. So if I were a reviewer, that's one of the things I'd point out. Like, you mentioned hawkish, like that's one of your main findings, yet we don't know what that means in terms of, or how to conceptualize that in the context of your article. So I would say be a little bit clear about that. And then also, if you, and again, maybe we could talk more about the nuts and bolts of the experiment, but if there was a way to capture how your respondents understood these terms, or a way to capture a little bit more about, again, the context here, right? I think because Ghana, Nigeria, and India are so, in your argument, so divergent from sort of the Western democratic cases of examining democratic peace, there's a lot more to be explained than I think is presented here. So I think that offers, being clear in your conceptualizations offers a way to get at some of these questions of contextualization as well. And then the last few comments I'll make are about sort of how you're building your theory. And I would suggest that you build a theory around your findings. Again, I'll use one of your conclusions, for example. One of your conclusions is that hawkishness is strong among Nigerian and Indian respondents, but weaker hawkishness and militarism among Nigerian and Ghanaians. And you attribute this to just power relations in the international system. But if you're aware of the context, right, I think there are more, these differences are way more significant, right? And I think you have a real potential to theorize around some of these, or build some theory around it. Or at the very least, ground the findings in in a brief historical analysis. So as I mentioned a few seconds ago, you can potentially build some sort of theory around democratic peace with the historical reality that India has never experienced military dictatorship, and Ghana. And this might, again, have some implications on how people in those countries perceive military territorial disputes, how they perceive other democracies, or quote unquote democracies, how they perceive their allies as well, right? And so I think you can make some claims, and then also make some claims about the role of the institutionalization of the military, right? That might also play, and you might want to include that maybe in some sort of control as well. Similarly, I think you might want to problematize or think more clearly about how you're theorizing about the relationships between some of your findings. So, for example, why do you think, or how would you explain the relationship between high militarization, and that is not perceived as a use of force as a symbol of foreign policy failure? And how do you explain the relationship between foreign policy failure and hawkishness, right? Or foreign policy failure and democratic alliances, right? Like, so maybe talk about how you see, or even how you theorize what that relationship would be. I think that would be significant. And I think, again, you bring in sort of this, in your discussion section, you talk about the findings between Ghana, Nigeria, and India on that relationship between militarization and use of force as a symbol of foreign policy failure, and say it doesn't meet this the same robustness as another article that uses Brazil and China, right? So even there, I think is an opportunity to explain, again, with context, why the context of Ghana, Nigeria, India are significant and different and diverge from previous literature, right? And then I would push you to go further in your implications, right? And so, I'm familiar with the 2017 article by Femke, but where you talk a lot about socialization and sort of really sort of conceptualizing what the micro foundations are. That's another piece I think you all could do better, is to actually tell us what the micro foundations are. So you argue in the implications that democratic peace theory does not, in these contexts, don't apply to the micro foundations, yet we don't really know which micro foundations or at least clearly, it's not clear that we know what micro foundations you're examining. You also don't engage with this, the question that the previous articles bring up in this narrative of socialization, or the concept or how liberal norms manifest themselves in, or if they do, or if they don't manifest themselves in the context of Ghana and Nigeria. So you want to just be a little bit more direct and clear about how exactly you're building off of these places. But again, I think this all ties back into your ability to theorize and make your voice more prevalent in the paper. So those are my comments for now. Again, it's a very interesting paper. I think you have the potential to significantly improve it, to make it an even stronger paper. So great work, and look forward to hearing other comments.
Great, thanks, Emmanuel. All right, we'll turn it now over to Femke.
Yeah. Yes. Hi, Michael. Hi, Zlatan. Hi, all. I'm sorry I was a little bit late. I wasn't aware of the daylight savings, so I'm sorry I missed biggest part of your presentation. But I did read your paper, and I have a lot of comments. I think Emmanuel did a really good job mentioning a lot of things that I will probably also in a little bit different way mention. But let me start first to say that I think it's great research. It's really interesting, really needed also. As you might know, that I'm very critical of democratic peace theory, and in the work that I do on it, I really focus on showing that basically the assumptions, the micro foundations that we have, assumptions about individuals, are basically, we cannot use them like that. And I really love the case selection that you have to take it out of that Western sphere and using also different democracies. I think that's really important. And so I think that the paper is also still in a very preliminary phase. That's like what Emmanuel said, that's also fine. That's why you're here. That's why you're getting feedback. So everything that I'm going to say, also take it like that, right? So sometimes I hear I can sound a little bit harsh. I don't mean to. I really mean to give you feedback that you can build on and improve it. Because I think if you take it to a next level, it's going to be a really beautiful publication. So I really think it's a significant contribution to the field. So know that. So in line a little bit with what Emmanuel said also, that I think the theories really needs to be set up more clearly. And there are very different ways to fly into that. I really like the idea that Emmanuel had to say, well, you have to use your own voice. And I think starting from basically the case selection that you have, without making it per se about those cases, but on a more abstract level, the deviation of those studies that are always taking a look at America, maybe the UK, but that's about it. Here and there, Israel, Spain, but well, besides what I did, but I also took the US as one of the cases. And I did that because I wanted to contrast that we can take it beyond that. And so I really love what you're doing it. And I really like the idea of Emmanuel. I didn't think of that myself, that could be your way to step into that. But you will have to relate to the democratic peace literature way more. Because I can tell you from my own experience, it's pretty hard to publish criticism on democratic peace theory, unless you're really coming from like a realist focal point when you speak, where you basically argue that democracy or the regime type doesn't matter. But we're not going on a more aggregate level, we're going here to a micro level. And generally within the IR crowd, that's sometimes really hard to find reviewers who really like that and see that. So for that, you really need to realize that you have to build on the research that is there, to give the credits to what's there, even if you don't agree with it. Actually, that's also what we do here in the academia, of course, but then see how you deviate and how you contribute to the insights that are there also. So, so you chose to choose for public opinion, which I think is a very valid choice, especially when you also use the Thoms and Weeks, for instance, who argue about that. When you look at my work, you can see I don't speak about public opinion per se. The reason why I didn't do that, and what I miss here also, is because you really have to engage then with explaining why does public opinion matter for international relations. And yes, of course, you mentioned there's something, and that's clearly evident for me. I'm a political psychologist. I think the individuals matter, but the IR crowd doesn't always. So you have to. That's actually what Thomas and Week did pretty well. So you could see how they did it, but you have to make an argument there. What I did was flying it to a more theoretical argument, saying, well, in theory, this is the assumptions that you make on an aggregate level, but these are built on assumptions about individuals, about micro foundations. So let's test these. I'm not going to say anything about democratic peace. I'm going to say something about these assumptions. That's a different way to fly into it, but basically we're doing the same. But that's the narrative, that's the framing, what Emmanuel was also speaking about. So the article that you refer to, it's actually an excerpt from my dissertation, which I'm now working on to be published as a book, but it's also openly available. I can send you the link. So you can see how I really dissect the theory and go into that if you would like. You don't have to follow that because, you're doing your research, but it might be helpful to understand where it's coming from, what I'm saying also. And then I think but that has to do also with the beginning. I think it's important to have a strong focus of the paper, because now you mention several explanations without elaborating precisely on each of them. And I need that when I read it. I really need to know what is the focus and what is your main hypothesis? What is the main test? And of course, there can be other tests that are also important, but now it's a little bit too widespread. And indeed, the hypotheses come a little bit out of thin air suddenly. And some of them also sound a bit descriptive that I'm not so sure, because you didn't discuss them in the theory. So I don't really know what is the relevance, what is the place, is it the control, is it meant descriptive? So I think choosing what is the core, the skeleton of the study, and then see how you fill it up with the other information. Maybe just one hypothesis might be enough, and you still have all these questions that you can still, in a descriptive and more thick description in your results, you can relate to it, and maybe even connect it also to the specifics of the cases that you picked. So these are just ideas, that you can work with. It might be that some of them you don't resonate with you, then you can follow another path, but maybe they inspire you to think of it in a different way. But then whatever focus it's going to be, you really need to explain the theory more clearly with more precision, especially because you're using an experiment. An experiment is like taking a theory and, it's like a surgeon going to the bone and picking all the little elements out of it. But you have to set this up in theory and then in the concepts, so that we know how you're going to operationalize them. Because when we get to the results, we want to really see how the results connect to the theory. And if the theory is not clearly elaborated, that's a little bit difficult. And of course, I can follow it because I know the field and I know what you're doing, and I see really the value, and I see also that you know what you're doing. I see you know the literature. But you have to make it more evident because most reviewers will not be so in depth into this as I am. So that will be helpful also. Also, I was thinking, but when I wrote it down, I thought, well, that might be a little bit too much of an ego trip. So I'm sorry if it sounds like that. But you conclude that hawkishness is really important. That's also the conclusion of my study, of actually the whole dissertation. The name of my dissertation in the book is Hawks and Doves, Democratic Peace Revisited. That's the dissertation. The book will be called the Flawed Micro Foundations of Democratic Peace. A little bit stronger, it sells better, I hope. But you also find that, and that's also what Emmanuel said, why not take this up to the front? And it's hard because hawkishness, when I use it, it was a control at first it was a control, because in my first study I also did something with that and I want to take it in. But then it turned out to be really important. And I discovered that there's not real theory about it, and that the studies that were conducted were really tautological. In my dissertation, I really go more in depth about this. So I decided to keep my study also behavioralistic. So I didn't turn it around and said like I had a theory already, but you can do so. You can use those results and say, listen, I have these results and I can build a little bit stronger on this. And then you have these findings, so you can really make it work for you, because you have these results and you have something to stand on and jump off from it. So you can jump off from me, let's say, and make it even stronger and better for yourself. I think it will also help, because there are a lot of studies in democratic peace theory that are not so critical, that really think that democratic peace works, exists. It's a good explanation. We're building policies on it. So when you find other studies that are critical and your findings are in line, you can strengthen each other by using that. So that was enough for the ego, sorry. So yeah, there also have been a lot of more experimental studies in democratic peace. Not a lot, but there are more than you mentioned. It might be worthwhile to take a look at that and see what they argue and how you can use that. This was about this. I think this is also what I said. Yeah, so in your research design, you have a lot of questions that you didn't mention in theory. So I'm not sure what are the independent variables, what are controls, what are moderators or mediators. So you might, but that has to do with the focus also. And I think when you have this focus, then you can just know what to discuss in theory. But even controls, you have to mention briefly in your theory, even with one sentence, just like that. So when you go to the method, I think you can set it up a little bit more careful, explain first also the methods, why use experiments. That's not for everyone accepted. A lot of people say, yeah, but it's, you know, it's a laboratory environment. And so you really have to show why you do this. And of course that others are also doing this, but that's not just enough. You also have to come with a good theoretical idea of why you do that. Then also your case selection, which is, I think, the most important part of your study and so valuable. You know, you can spend some more time explaining why that is. And of course, it's a response on what you wrote, like Toms and Weeks, but I think there's much more to it that you can use there. And then get into your, oh yeah, and then your sample choice also, that would be, you have to say something about that, and some descriptives about the sample choice also, and the procedure. Procedure can be just 3 sentences, but you have to say something that we know about experiments, that you have followed really strong protocols, because that's important with experiments. And then you get into operationalization, and I think take a look at some other studies into democratic peace study and how they explain the operationalization. I think I asked you for the appendix, basically for the experiment, so because I really needed to see, and I think you could explain that more elaborative, more related also to the theory, how you how you use these concepts and operationalize them. Then for your results, you use the regression. I generally use ANOVA with ANCOVA for experiments, but basically, you know, it's based on the same assumptions of linearity, so that's not really a problem. But ANOVA is used a lot within experiments, but regression is also fine. But then I suddenly saw, well, you have a lot of dependent variables, a lot of tests. And then I got a little bit the same feeling as in the theory, you know, it's going into a lot of places, but it lacks this focus. And I think having this, and one of these beautiful things, I think that if you have this focus, that you basically go for one strong dependent variable, then you have your model where you can build in the different covariates, the moderators, you know, use then different models to expand on it, whether it's a regression or it's an ANOVA with ANCOVA. But also think of possible interactions, because I missed some interaction effects that you could check for. I would also want to know if there wasn't any multicollinearity. Maybe you mentioned it, but I don't think so, because, you know, militarism and hawkishness, there might be some multicollinearity, which might be okay, but it's just a footnote, right? But it's one of these technical things that might come up. Why I'm saying this, because critics might say, well, this is tautological, and, you know, and if you can show based on statistics it's not, then, you know, that's just, but these things matter very often for critical reviewers. So, and then in your discussion, then, yeah, actually, also, if you have a new version, a new draft, feel free to send it to me. I will read it again for you. I would love to. Just give me some time, but I will, because now I really would like to see this focus and then see the results and your discussion of it related to that, because now it felt to me a little bit descriptive, because I missed this focus. There are a lot of interesting results, and it's up to you guys to decide, you know, where you want to go with it, where you want to take it, and what is going to be your focus, and what's going to be next to it, like the flesh on the rest of the paper. And I really love it that you discuss the limitations at the end, but don't cut yourself in your fingers, you know, just mention them, but then also show why this is really good step forward and how others or you yourself can jump off from this. It's really good that you consider limitations, of course, but always end on a good note, like, what are you bringing? Because otherwise a reviewer will think, oh, well, so yeah, it was a nice study, but all these limitations, I don't know. So you have to reframe it, but that's also part of the rewrite. So minor things, you know, it is Tom's with a Z. One sometimes it was even just Tom written, just small things, and there are some things with language that you might work on when you go over it. I think you should refer a little bit more. Sometimes you really argue something about other studies, but you don't refer to who they said. Sometimes you collapse a lot of studies into one that I don't think it's completely right. For instance, about me, you argue something I said that I didn't say. I will send you my my comments so you can see where that is. And that was it. Yes, there was a lot, sorry, but if you like, I can send you the file with all the comments in it, and really, if you have a new version, I would love to read it, because I'm really interested to follow you guys. And I replicated my experiment also in India not so long ago, and in France. And also with me, hawkishness is really strong. So, you know, we're really on the same page, I think. So it would be, I would love it to keep in touch with you. I'll mute myself.
That's great. So I'm in the interest of time, perhaps Michael and Zlatan, you want to take questions from the audience, and then that way you can get like maximize the feedback, and then maybe you can respond to the discussants.
Okay.
Okay.
Are there any questions from folks? You can put up your hand in you can use the hand function or the chat function. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, I'll dive in here. Really great to read this paper. I love to see some of these key theories we have in political science tested in contexts that clearly need more work in these areas. And so it was great to see this work being done. I would just, I mean, I don't think I have too much to say that's new from what's been said, except I just think that I just agree that there's a really great opportunity for you to spend more time justifying a lot of what you do. In particular, I found you have a sentence near the end about how, you know, you say democratic peace theory, you try to establish whether, you know, like the microfoundations work in contexts where, like, non-Western countries without a substantial history of intervention. I think that's a really interesting idea that it'd be great to see developed further in sort of the theoretical justification for what you're doing. And, you know, I think it's also important to justify why Ghana, why Nigeria, why India, and whether those three cases kind of work in similar ways. I mean, my initial thought here, and I don't know a ton about the Indian case, but India has this, long-running northern border, sort of contentious relationship that I think is distinct from some of the things we see in West Africa. So yeah, I think it just, take the opportunity to justify what you're doing more. The other thing, just on the experiment side, I'd say briefly is that, so you make this argument that you don't find evidence. With experiments, of course, that can be both because there isn't an effect and because your study was underpowered. And so I think you need to make sure you justify that you had sufficient power to make the null findings meaningful. And one way that you could approach this is, there's other experiments looking at democratic peace in various contexts, and you could look at the effect sizes and sample sizes of those studies as a comparison to try to justify that your study was powered enough to have that, precise null. But anyway, yeah, I really enjoyed hearing about this and reading the study, and I wish you luck as you continue to develop it.
Thank you.
Other questions? I might take this opportunity to ask a question. To piggyback kind of on what Peter was saying. So one of the things I was missing or wishing to see was actually the treatment conditions, like in the explanation. So you said it's a factorial design. And so I wanted to know like what all was actually varying and how many respondents were in each treatment condition, because I just looked, and if you had a 3x2x2, that's like 16 conditions. And in the Ghana case, that means there'd be like 8 people per condition, right? Which is quite small. And so to that end, I am curious as to whether you plan to expand the sample and look at, yeah, I know you had talked about South Africa, but also maybe within these countries, trying to get maybe a larger sample size might be helpful to get at these null findings that you have. I also was kind of, I mean, you don't show us the full like analysis of the full sample. You disaggregate by country, but it might be interesting to show both without the controls and with across the 3 countries, and also to show us some summary statistics about these sample, like who are these folks that are participating in your study, what do we know about like partisanship, whether that matters. So that's kind of relates to Emmanuel's points about the context. And so I think just, yeah, expanding out some of the descriptive statistics related to the analyses you've done would be helpful too.
So for the, actually, I did that typo. So only India has actually 16 treatments. Ghana, Nigeria, they only have 8 because we only use territorial threat. And right, so if for India, 8 of the conditions use the territorial threat in the vignettes, the treatments, and the other 8, they use the nuclear threat. And as Michael said, because it's very unrealistic. We first started with chemical weapons, maybe nuclear, but in African context, it's very, very unrealistic, right? So South Africa, they removed the nuclear weapons back in the late 80s, and they might be, if eventually we turn out to actually run the sample in South Africa, we're thinking also about Botswana, but right. So in terms of so the elements that vary, it's really like copying from other scholars, right? The elements, it's like whether there's one line where, okay, the aggressor country has high levels of threat or not with the respective country, whether it's the Indian sample, Nigerian, or Ghanaian. Then it has the right. So the aggressor country has an alliance or not, right? So and whether the aggressor country is democracy or an autocracy. So that's the 3 elements which we vary. We just kind of, that's how eventually we end up with 8 treatments, which is kind of standard. But we just studied a lot of the vignettes, right? So a lot of the treatments from other scholars, and that's how we. So because there was a lot of debate, because the actual treatment is an intent. Right, so based on the regime of the country, whether it has high levels of trade, whether it has an alliance, is actually okay, so the country is taking aggressive actions and is planning to resolve that territorial dispute, and right, so it's kind of an intent that the country might attack, right? So it's kind of very clear based on the rhetoric of the country, because if I remember correctly, a few of the democratic peace theory experiments from other scholars, the country has already engaged another country, and they right, so and actually, so that also I was thinking that might be an issue, but I mean, I think 2/3 of the vignettes that actual treatments I've seen, including from Professor Bakke, is like there's an intent, right? So there is actually an intent that the country will attack, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm making a mistake with that treatment. So it's not like the country has already attacked, and we are asking Ghanaians and Nigerians and Indians, hey, are you going to react based on the country's right, so relationship, whether it's a democracy, whether it's autocracy, whether it has high levels of trade with Ghana, India, Nigeria, or whether it has an alliance with Ghana, India, or Nigeria. So that's one aspect which kind of is not very clear. It was not very clear for us, but based on our reviews, most of the treatments that are used, there's an intent of an attack, right? So there's not actually, they already crossed the border, and hey, are you willing to send the Indian army or the Ghanaian army or the Nigerian army? And for the samples, for India, we control for a kind of quarter. We set a quarter because the Indian MTurk sample really is filling up with Tamils from South India, because they usually have like a better English language ability. So we control for that, because in my dissertation, I'm also using, which is a separate project, I'm also using MTurk in India quite extensively. It's really, if you let it be, it's going to be 40-45% Tamils, which is going to raise a lot of eyebrows by reviewers. So, okay, so you're having a very specific minority in India. So that's why we practically blocked them after they reached, like, I have to see what was in this particular, the 2 Indian samples, but I think it's no more than 15% of the sample. So that's, we control for that, because like people that so that might be a problem. For the Nigerian and Ghanaian samples, they're just students. We have to, there's nothing strange about that in terms of other studies using the student samples. We have to see but usually they're more educated. As Michael mentioned, they're more educated, they have English language ability, and the idea is that we're using kind of the standard argument that, hey, these people most likely work in the government or they have businesses, they'll be more influential. So that might be, yeah, its sample is not that large, but also at the end of the day, they might be much more influential for the actual political class of that country, because first of all, they have the education, they have the language skills, and they have the socioeconomic status eventually, because whoever goes to universities, especially in Ghana and Nigeria, they tend to be a little bit more from the privileged.
Great.
And also regarding the samples, yeah, it's especially for Ghana, we are still collecting. So the sample is larger than that. So yeah, but then I have a general comment for both Dr. Emmanuel and Femke. I appreciate so much your advice about theory. And theorization, especially in the African context. It's exciting to me. Maybe probably one other thing we haven't mentioned is that what we are also finding is that when you look at the findings we have so far and you compare that with Afrobarometer findings that has been available for so long, it is interesting to find that both Ghanaians and Nigerians especially are so much excited about democracy at home. But it appears that they don't care so much to externalize that, in their international relations with other countries. Democracy doesn't seem to bother them so much. So there's something going on there. We like good institutions, we want free and fair elections at home. But it appears they don't bother so much whether the country they are dealing with has the same institutions or not. So for me, as Ghanaian, that picks my mind a bit. I want to find out why is that the case, right? So I agree that there is a lot of theorization that needs to be done in that regard. So we'll take a second look at it and more carefully do something about it. So
in that line, we didn't present it here, but we did for Ghana and Nigeria, and for India, we did the democracy promotion, like a second smaller experiment, democracy promotion. How likely that they're going to actually act as the I call them the preacher countries, right? So France, England, United States, Canada, right? So democracy works for us domestically and also internationally. We should have something like democracy in the UN. So you should actually have the same regime, right? So, and we also did that. It's a small experiment, and we are thinking whether to integrate it or not, or to be a separate paper, because it's more like, hey, this country is in trouble, and this country is an autocracy, and it's seen that they're unstable, and how likely you're going to support the Democratic Party in that country, how likely you're going to actually impose sanctions. So it's more like tune into, as Michael suggested, democracy promotion rather than kind of use of force in the classic sense of the theory. So we try to, it's like, we're trying to do something totally new in that respect. We'll see, and the results there's nothing. They don't want to do democracy promotion, right? So when the experiment is framed in a very different way, Nigerians, Ghanaians, and Indians, they really don't care in terms of, let's say, the British public or the American public. Hey, we can actually have to do democracy promotion in a number of ways, supporting international organizations, supporting human rights organizations, imposing sanctions if there are some domestic issues, violations of human rights. They really don't, like, there's nothing there. But we haven't actually done the full analysis of that second smaller experiment.
All right. Well, yeah, I was going to say, Femke, you want to,
yeah, because I couldn't find my digital hand to raise. Yeah. So that is really interesting what you're saying, and it also makes me think of one of the things that I explicitly did was not to mention within the treatment if the country was a democracy or an autocracy. I really chose to describe the practices of both, because I was, for instance, working with China. When you look at the World Values Survey and you ask how democratic they think their country is, they think it's pretty democratic, while we don't really mean the same like when we speak about a Western democracy. So to use that, but that is really interesting what you're telling me now. And for me, that also connects to this idea that we have in the West about, like, actually what I'm in my dissertation raging a little bit against, the idea that democracy can be like a medicine that we bring in and everything will be all right. Well, when we look in our own Western democracies, not everything is all right. There's still people murdered and raped, and a lot of terrible things are going on. So yeah, it would be really interesting to hear more about that. But about the vignettes, I explicitly chose not to have an attack already. I had an ongoing conflict about something that was not so much as a taking in the territory, as a basic conflict. And then I had different treatments over if it was soft power or hard power, if it was invasive or not. So I could really control those elements, because you're right, all these other studies have an aggressor who attacks, and then you can say it's a democracy or not, but there is already the idea that the other one is the bad guy. And I wanted to have a more neutral conflict situation, which was pretty hard to think of, and then tweak whether the behavior was bad or not, to see if that was of influence. And it was surprisingly not so much of influence, only slightly. So yeah, okay, that was it.
Well, this is great, and we've had such a great discussion. I wish we could keep it going, but we are at time. So I appreciate everyone participation today in the colloquium. Thank you, Michael and Zlatan, for sharing your paper with us, and Emmanuel and Femke for great comments. I hope this was super helpful for both you, Michael and Zlatan. We will post the recording of this up on the APCG website. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming. And look forward to you attending some of the others that are coming up next month.
Best of luck with the paper, and also send it new drafts when you're ready. Happy to read.
Yeah, yeah. I will send you my draft with the comments in the line. And
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll send it to you. Good luck, and
thank you, Justin.
Thank you everyone for attending.
Bye bye.
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 Bye.